Now, how to practice evidence-based in the ward round? As a matter of fact, so many things I've mentioned actually already. You just have to, you can easily apply in your ward round. Okay, just to remind people now, evidence-based medicine is actually defined as applying the 3 E's, which is actually patient expectations and preferences and values, the expertise, and the evidence. So if you put them together, you have evidence-based practice. Now, to achieve the evidence, to reach the evidence, you need to have something called the 5 A's, right? You need to be able to practice the 5 A's to reach the evidence, right? So that you can complete an important dimension in the three elements of evidence-based practice. Now, the 5 A's are actually ask, clinical question, acquire, appraise, apply, and assess. Now, people who have attended an evidence-based medicine course, and At-Tabab also offers these courses, right? You will actually learn how to use the 5 A's. Now, you cannot have an evidence-based round unless you have an idea about evidence-based medicine. So these are important concepts. For the first A, we use something called the PICO. And PICO, I have already showed you just briefly before, patient intervention, comparison, and outcome. And you do for the acquiring, you do something called literature searching, and it has certain skill to do it. And then for the appraise is about judging the trustworthiness of a literature, and there is a process called critical appraisal. And then we apply, or knowledge translation, we apply what we have learned from all this, we apply, and then we assess whether we are doing it properly, usually using audit. Okay. Now, for example, in this particular patient with heart failure, now evidence-based intervention would be like using SLRs or beta blockers, spironolactone, right? And then patient expectations. We find out what the patients want, and then we actually try to achieve what they want, right? And the clinical experience. From your experience, from the what drugs are available, what is cheaper. So use your experience actually to give something which helps the patient. Okay. Now, what I'm going to go through is I'll tell you about what is meant by an evidence-based ward round, why is it important, how it's different from the usual round, and how is it done, and what do you need to do it. So I'll answer these questions. The simple thing is when we do the round, actually, we're actually going through the history, and we go through diagnosis, and we go to therapy, and we might even go to prognosis. Now, all of them, we can ask questions about them and look for their evidence. So what is the best diagnostic test? What is the sensitivity, specificity, or likelihood ratio of a diagnostic test? Now, what are the recommended therapeutic interventions? How can we calculate the prognosis? Is there a calculator rule, a calculator we can use for prognostication, right? So all the questions that come up, you will look for the evidence for them, right? And you can go as many questions as you wish, and it depends on the time. And as a matter of fact, most of the time, our round is actually, we practice evidence-based medicine in our round. We have no round without EBM part of it, right? Not only that, we have no round without competencies, right? We ask them in the round, we use DVT prophylaxis. What is it? They say it's advocacy. Or we tell them as a medical expert, what is the 5S for this? Okay, so we use both evidence and competencies in our ward rounds. Okay, right. So we go all this through all the 5 steps: ask, acquire, appraise, apply, and the evidence during the round. The traditional ward round is you have a clinical problem, right? You just rely on expertise and experience, and you reach the decisions. But this doesn't happen in evidence-based ward round. Evidence-based ward round, there is still the experience and expertise, but you ask questions, you use a PICO. You look for the relevant articles. You might even, you open the BMJ best practice while you are doing the ward round. Obviously you don't have time to appraise, but you tell people you go and appraise it and bring it next day. So your round now has another dimension added, right? So every time you are asking a PICO and you are doing a PICO search, and PubMed by a PICO is a PICO search engine, and there is TRIP database which has also another PICO search engine, and you can actually do a PICO while you are with the patient. And these PICO search engines they are available as apps. You can download them on your phone so that you don't have to search for a PICO in Google. You have an app where there is a PICO. You just use it there. Now, you really need to know some EBMs, and you ask so that you can ask the 5As. So you cannot do an evidence-based ward round without actually knowing something about evidence-based medicine. And then without an internet connection, forget it. You need an internet connection. Without an internet connection, you cannot do an EBM, evidence-based round. And we found that you cannot do it if you are doing a standing round, because people don't like to stand and talk, right? And we found that the best way is to have a sitting ward round before you go and see the patients. So you do a sitting ward round, you sit, talk, and do the search, because while you're sitting, you can access your computer if you have a desktop computer, or you can ask if you are having your iPad with you, or you're having your laptop with you, or just your own mobile phone, right? Because you need to be relaxing. And we do it like this because we can also socialize. We can have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea while we're all talking about these things. It makes the ward round actually much more friendlier. So you really need these three prerequisites, right? So as I mentioned, you can use point of care resources like PubMed via PICO is a point of care, or a BMJ, or you can open Medscape and you look at some calculators, right? And you can look at shared decision-making indicators. There are something called education prescription. These are the experts in EBM use it. You can do some exercises in critical appraisal, but this needs time, right? You can do clinical-based clinical examination, and I gave you the book. I showed you the book actually where you have the sensitivity, specificity of each symptom sign or symptom or sign, or sometimes test, and you can use it to make your examination rational, right? And you can use EBM to decide on the sensitivity and specificity, which test you should use, or the therapeutic interventions which are evidence-based. So you can talk about spin and snout during ward round, a number needed to treat, number needed to harm. As I said, you can have appraisal homeworks, and you can also even talk about some quality improvement. You know, what are the recommended evidence-based interventions to improve the quality of service, right? And some people who are really, as David Sackett and the original people who developed EBM, had a librarian in the ward round, okay, is to help them in the literature search, right? This was there. Now you don't need a librarian if you're an expert in literature searching, right? You can do bedside literature searching. There are many resources like the BMJ best practice. There is something called the education prescription. It's a simple, page. You have it in the ward round and ask people to put the PICO, right? What is the problem, the intervention and comparison and the outcome. And then people do the search and then come back the next day telling you what they have done, right? This is, I showed you. And as I said, you can use it at the bedside and look, for example, if you have a patient with heart failure and you look at the sensitivity, specificity of all the symptoms and in the history, points in the history, points on the examination, symptoms and the signs, and you can look at the sensitivity and likelihood ratios, and you come up with very fascinating findings, right? That the only sign that confirms really the diagnosis, of heart failure is really third galloperism, right? The only one which is more than 10 likelihood ratio, okay? And this is the best one. The others are helpful, but not as great as the galloperism. And if you ask a cardiologist, what's the best sign for diagnosing left ventricular failure, unless they know about EBM, sensitivity, specificity, they will not know that galloperism is the only sign that confirms at the bedside that the patient has heart failure. The others are supportive, but not really as diagnostic, right? And this is the X-ray changes and the things which help you to decide. And this is a very nice table, and you can share it with cardiologists, and you'll find it very fascinating, right? Now, this is actually, again, about some tests for DVT, pulmonary embolism, myocardial infarction, coronary radiovascular hypertension. And these tests are actually what are the sensitivity, specificity, and likelihood ratios. And again, becomes a fascinating read while you are doing the ward round. And you can see there are loads of tests which becomes very useful to know about when you are dealing with a patient. You can do a PubMed by Pico search while you are seeing the patient, and you can just do it and find the result there. You can use some calculators while you're doing the round, like CHADS and NHF pulmonary embolism, right? And UpToDate has many calculators, but even if you go to Medscape or you download Medscape, MedCalc, or something called QXMed, you can download them in your iPhone, on your phone, and then you can use them actually to do some calculations, and then you are an EBM practitioner. You just use calculators for anything. You can even do body mass index or creatinine clearance, okay? Or somebody with heart failure, look at their NIHA. You have somebody with an ABG, you can put the ABG findings, and it tells you what type of acid-base imbalance the patient had if you're in the ICU. So you can use a calculator. There are many resources for patient decision support system, and this is important for patient-centered care, right? So evidence-based ward round is easy to do. And you can make it a routine, so that every time you tell about why are we doing the CRP and not procalcitonin. The people know that procalcitonin is more specific for infection than CRP. So, and more specific for bacterial infection than the CRP. Why are we doing ANA and not double-stranded DNA? Why are we doing FOBs and not colonoscopy? Why are we doing spiral CT and not the D-dimer? Okay, because you discuss these and talk about sensitivity, specificity, right? And you can test your doctors, the BMP or the CRP or the ASR is high. So is it a sensitive test or a specific test? And then you become an EBM practitioner. So in summary, you can become a master of evidence-based practice simply by doing one or more of the 5 A's in your ward round. Asking or acquiring questions relevant to the evidence-based practice. So the bottom line is that clinical excellence hinges on 4 practices: evidence, quality, competencies, patient-centeredness, right? And these are the 4. And as a matter of fact, your work revolves around these 4. And training in all of them is really crucial. You cannot say that you have a good training program unless you touch on all the 4 of them, right? So you really have to start applying them in your everyday practice, right? And this is my last slide. I finish here, and thank you very much for taking part and for listening. If I can stop the recording, please.